Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast. I have Adam Hanin with me today from eHouse, which is going to be a tremendous episode. Adam, I'm excited to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Todd. I'm happy to be here.
My name's Todd Taskey. I am your host. The good people at Fiscal Advocate are our sponsors, so I want to give them a quick shout out. The guys at Fiscal Advocate create a financial dashboard for agency owners so that they see their business from a dashboard and financial metrics perspective, and they can make good decisions from that. So Fiscal Advocate, they're in the show notes. You can find them online. Thanks to them for sponsoring us. And Adam, again, thanks for joining us. You are an interesting character in my book. You've been an entrepreneur literally probably in college, but started to get notice out of college because you started a company called Campus Outfitters, built and sold that, had a business called Skye, built a company called Commerce 12 that was on the Inc. list a couple of times and are now part of eHouse. So what I want to do is touch on the earlier parts first to get a perspective of who you are. And then I'd really like to dig into what you're doing with e-commerce, what you're doing with eHouse, how you move Commerce 12 into that, and so on. But you're beginning with Campus Outfitters. Mm-hmm. Both of my girls went to private school. I know your kids went to private school. I never knew anyone that thought, hey, we could do uniforms better than this. Tell me the quick story there.
So I graduated in college. I'm going to date myself here. So I graduated college in 1997. My father bought the inventory from a bankrupt uniform company that was a very mom and pop niche neighborhood style business. And basically just went out and tried to get these schools to utilize our services. You know, it was an interesting business model in that if you go to a school like Stone Ridge or DeMatha, everything that you purchase from the company has to have the school name on it. So there was an exclusive relationship. So although it was retail, it wasn't traditional retail. It was very predictable retail. So I was just 22 years old, cold calling machine, would just pound the phones and try to get meetings. And once I sort of realized that I had called all the schools in the Washington metropolitan area, I started calling schools outside of the DC area in West Virginia and North Carolina, places that I thought that I could sort of penetrate because there wasn't really a local player. And I also developed two models that sort of sprung that business. The first model was instead of ordering the uniforms that would come 8 to 12 weeks later, we actually would pre-purchase the merchandise, logo the merchandise ahead of time, and then truck the product to schools and have a cash and carry environment where the parents can buy everything and take it home with them. 2024 does not seem like a novel concept. Going back 25 years ago, this was something nobody else was doing. It was also very manual. You had to load trucks, unload trucks, reload, go to different schools. And again, I was 22 years old. I had a bunch of college kids in College Park where we were based that were my friends and, you know, some younger kids from college. I'd pay them $100 cash a day. This was like the job of the century. And then in 1999, I launched our first website for Campus Outfitters and started advertising on this little engine called Google. So if you went to Google and typed in school uniforms, Campus Outfitters not only was the only one that would show up, we were the only one that actually had a website. So like that's where I got my really early beginnings in the e-commerce, even though it wasn't traditional e-commerce in terms of selling online. So by 2000, not only did I have a website that represented 30 or 40 schools, I was also getting inbound leads from schools all over the country. So this roadshow concept of taking product and setting up stores in schools was even like more appealing to schools in Indianapolis and Buffalo and Dallas, et cetera. And so the business literally went from 2 regional storefronts to 11 stores in 10 different states.
Physical stores?
Physical stores, which was my biggest mistake in my young, immature years.
It was the way that retail was done.
It was the way retail was done. And what's interesting is that customers, some people will remember this, a lot won't, were afraid to put their credit cards down online to actually make a purchase. So in order for me to sort of protect my backyards, I felt the need to open up retail locations to protect, the markets that I was servicing. And I actually set up sort of a hub and spoke model where 5 or 6 of the locations had a small warehouse attached to the back. So I'd be running these on-site road shows at, 10 to 20 to 30 local schools within each market, and then have sort of the staple schools as like the hubs of what that independent market represented. I was approached by a company called VarsityBooks.com, which was a high flyer back in the tech boom days. They were funded with $100, $200 million. Their original model was to defeat the college bookstores with off price. And ultimately they sort of found themselves really catering to the K through 12 private school market, which obviously led them to want to diversify their services away from just textbooks and then sell uniforms as well. Concept was really strong. No disrespect to the management of the company, because I walked away with, quite a bit of stock that ended up not being worth too much. I think that they tried to expand their services into too many different categories too quickly, and ultimately that business fizzled. That being said, I did walk away
along with that deal.
I did. I was 29 years old. I think I walked away with maybe $1.2 million, $1.5 million. I also owned the building that I was in.
And how much in stock?
Oh gosh, I think I was granted about 400,000 shares of stock and 400,000 options, which I negotiated to vest immediately. Stock had a collar on it at $5.55, which means if the stock went below, they had to round out the difference in cash or additional stock. I think that I had a 2-year holding period on that. And sorry, I'm jogging my memory here, but the 2-year holding period, the stock went from $5.55 to 87 cents. And because I had so many shares, it was very difficult to garner any liquidity there.
Yeah.
So I think I ended up.
I'm sorry. Did you go through? You're young. Did you go through this by yourself? Did you hire a lawyer? Did you have a banker?
So I was very fortunate that my brother's best friend now happens to be the CEO of Skye and Arps, and so he sort of did me a favor, which at the time he wasn't the CEO, but clearly was on the fast track.
And Skadden's one of the largest and best, most respected law firms in the country.
Yes. So it was probably to not be the feather in his cap. This was probably the smallest transaction that Skye and Arps had ever represented, let alone his smallest deal that he had ever worked on. So, what I did learn from that experience was that I never wanted to work in retail again, even though I had some retail experience, and that my background really was meant to sort of forge a path down e-com. And, keeping in mind that this is still 2005. So at the end of the day, e-com to me was like my future and where I was going to go.
Except for the fact that the e-com in your first experience didn't work out. So, excuse me, you're at a point where retail is what it is, what it's always been for 100 years.
Yep.
E-com was going to be something, and now that has crashed, right? Because you've lost that piece. How did you rationalize what the future was going to look like, and what formed those opinions?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, I still saw, I recognized that e-com couldn't be a standalone at that time, even though I knew in time that would sort of weed itself out and become the future. And then I approached the owner of a regional retail company called National Jean Company in Long Island, New York, that had 5 retail locations in the fashion space. I was always very interested in the fashion space and wanted to sort of bring a little bit of that flavor down to my hometown, which was Bethesda, Maryland. And in meeting him, I approached him and actually pitched him on letting me license nationaljeancompany.com and allowing me to sort of run his e-commerce business as a standalone with licensing rights. We negotiated a deal, and the night before the deal closed, he said to me, I'm not really interested in doing this e-com deal only. Basically, if you want to do this, you have to open a retail store. And that immediately took me back to my past of exactly what I did not want to do. Back in those days, and maybe still today, I was a little bit of a workaholic, and I was at sort of the finish line here, and I caved and said, fine, I'll open a store, which in some ways was the best advice that he ever gave me, or even though it was self-serving because he wanted an additional licensing source, and he wanted to expand his retail footprint. That being said, I opened a store in downtown Bethesda, and The store did extraordinarily well. This is in about 2007, and retail was still on fire. And the premium denim market, for anybody listening that knows, premium denim, 7 Jeans, J Brand, Joe's Jeans, Hudson Jeans, $200 jeans were not a thing until 2007, and then it was everything. So he was sort of on the forefront of that. I opened a retail store. The retail store did unbelievable, and the e-commerce store struggled drastically because of competition. And if you remember, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how do you set up a deal with him? Do you pay him a fee or a commission on products sold and then use his infrastructure? What was the setup?
That's a great question. I love the deal that we structured. I thought it was extremely fair for both of us. I paid him a royalty on all net sales of 12% on any inventory I was pulling out of his inventory, obviously plus cost of goods. And then I paid him 6% on any inventory that I just sold as standalone that I bought and also sold and held in my retail locations. So I was leveraging my retail locations as my third store because I opened a second store in Virginia. So I had my 3 stores. I had store 1, Bethesda, store 2, Fairfax, and store 3 was web, and I had a shared inventory source. So even though the 6% wasn't a huge number, obviously I wanted the extra store for inventory movement, and I was synergizing across 3 revenue streams.
Right. But again, it's now the second time where brick and mortar has outperformed e-com.
Yes, until 2010. And so around 2008, when the financial crisis and the crash happened, basically 50% of boutiques and stores in California closed within literally 3 weeks. And there was so much inventory flooding the market in terms of the fashion industry that some business models erupted that some people may remember, like the Gilt Group and all of these what's called flash sale businesses that were selling inventory at 70 and 80% off. Big venture-backed companies, a lot of business, high volume, good margin, but really something that I looked at to say, not only can I not compete with all this venture money that's coming into this category, but this is not sustainable from an inventory perspective because all of this overflow of inventory ultimately in time is going to work itself out. So because I had my retail locations, I had a foray and a relationship and an entree into all these fashion brands that I was a buyer for my 2 retail locations. So I would go to a show, I would have buyers pick the products, and I would talk to the business owners, develop a relationship with them. And so once all of this happened in 2008, 2009, I started launching and managing individual brand websites for fashion brands. So there was no such thing as Shopify at the time. There was no such thing as open source platform for e-com. So I had my own proprietary system for nationaljeancompany.com. And now over the next 2 or 3 years, I launched 55 individual websites for fashion brands. So if you went to a website for a sweater company called 525 America, and you went to 525america.com, I was taking the pictures, I was running their marketing, I was doing the fulfillment, I was doing the customer service, I was running their social media. We were the one-stop shop for everything e-com because these manufacturers were not set up in any way, shape, or form to do direct-to-consumer business.
And what's the economics on a relationship like that?
So this was my biggest mistake probably in my career, and this is why my second business failed, which I've learned a tremendous amount from, and why I'm fortunate enough to be where I am today is from the losses. The economic model was 30% net revenue commission, no floor, no ceiling. So the challenge that I started to run into was that I had some brands that I took from $0 to $1 or $2 million in sales, which doing the math is a $300,000 to $600,000 annual fee. And I had brands that were doing $100,000 a year, which was a $30,000 a year fee. And as time went on, the negotiations started to happen with brands doing the 1s and 2s millions, and the negotiations didn't happen with the brands doing 100,000 because they couldn't afford to negotiate. Right. There wasn't enough business. There wasn't enough margin for them. And ultimately, it was accretive to my business model from a revenue perspective as it was sharing all my overhead costs. But then came this platform called Shopify. And Shopify literally was a significant factor in the demise of my second company. Just because. Do you
remember what it was like, Adam, the first time you learned about Shopify or saw it, what your thoughts and emotions were?
My thoughts and emotions were, I was a probably 33, 34-year-old, slightly arrogant, ignorant kid that said, oh, our platform is better than them. We're going to beat them.
A pretty typical response, by the way.
Yeah. Well, maybe at that age. Yeah. I don't think I would have the same response now. I'd probably be a little more scared.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I fought that battle for a few years and started to recognize that their ability to grow and scale e-commerce businesses at a cost versus what I was paying for my tech department to maintain a proprietary platform was not a sustainable business model.
Yeah,
and
it's a race to scale, right? And they got there pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And on top of that, my 30% no floor, no ceiling pricing model was antiquated, way too risky, and non-predictable from a business management perspective, and something that I realized was a huge mistake, right?
So this is Skye, and did you just one day close that business?
I had an investor group, some friends and family, but predominantly one independent. Still burns me to this day that I lost money for my friends and family, obviously including myself. Probably the biggest driver that led to success with Commerce 12, in that, I learned a pricing discipline, and I learned sort of to join forces with the powers that be and not try to fight the powers that be, aka Shopify. And I started a small little agency. I handed the keys over to the investor and walked away from the business, essentially.
Emotionally difficult. Everything somebody would expect happens when you don't have.
I was 40 years old. I was walking away from my business that I still owned a significant percentage of equity in, even though it was relatively worthless. Had no job, 3 kids. I would say it was the darkest days of my life was probably from age 40 to 42, and probably when your expenses are the highest. So,
yeah.
I just put my head down and fought, which is the only thing you really can do in those kinds of situations.
Amen.
Right. And so I started Commerce 12 at my bar in my house, literally with $2,000, and refused to sort of have the 50-person company, which I had at Commerce with Campus Outfitters, the 50-person company at Skye Associates, and said, for all these years now, in my 15 working years, I've sort of, built these amazing teams of people in these family environments, yet I sort of wasn't taking care of my own family. I didn't take a paycheck at Commerce 12 at Skye Associates for 2 years. I mean, it was a rough time. Yeah. And I said, I just need to take care of my family. And started at my bar and basically just started consulting. Finally got.
Who was your first client?
My first client were, they were a couple of old clients that I was working with, and an old friend named Brian Robinson in New York, who was my mentor at the time. He had a conglomerate of about 6 fashion brands, and he kind of gave me the keys to all 6. I think he was paying me, I don't really recall, maybe it was $10,000, $15,000 a month, but something that I could start to really live on and at least get back on my feet. So I still thank him to this day for sort of helping me get back on my feet. And I started to learn Shopify. I mean, it was almost like a startup learning a new platform. And I was just blown away with the ease of the platform. And
were all his brands on Shopify, or you put them on?
None. So I really built him an e-com. He really didn't have a direct-to-consumer department. I was living up in New York 3 days a week. I was commuting up there, staying in a hotel. I mean, just doing what I had to do. Obviously, again, had 3 younger children. Missed some things here and there, but that was always a big thing in my life, was always never to miss my kids' stuff. So that was a time I really didn't have much of a choice. And, one client became 5 clients. And I finally started to get some traction and now I started to make, a decent living. I was probably servicing 20 clients, had all subcontractors, couple of like moms that I was friends with from growing up, making an hourly rate that was a flexible job for them, working 4 or 5 hours a day. But really, I was the account manager. I was literally.
So it's not a business yet. It's just a consultancy.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think we got the revenue up to about $1 million, super high margin. So yeah. It was a small agency. And the way that I like to call it is we're an e-commerce operational agency. So again, we don't just do one function, we sort of do everything. And that'll sort of lead into how you'll understand sort of the development of Commerce 12 and what ultimately led to the exit. was when COVID hit in 2020. One of my clients was a small fashion brand out of LA called LA Made Clothing. Yeah.
So in 2020, you've got roughly how many clients and what's the business like?
I'd say I probably had about 20 clients. I'm probably doing about $1.2 million in revenue, probably at about a 50-point net margin. So I'm making five.
Yeah, so you got a good life and you're breathing easier again. And then holy shit, now it's COVID.
I got a lifestyle business now, right? Which I never had before, right? I was always building to sell or building to grow. Campus Outfitters, I was too young to think about selling. This was going to be my livelihood for the rest of my life. I was going to be the king of school uniforms. I got an offer from a public company, took it. Second business, I was building and growing to sell. Commerce 12, I was building to live, right? And it's interesting because that was my best exit, is the company that I was never thinking about selling, right? Which is advice that I give to some younger people that I mentor all the time. It's like, don't worry about the end. Just keep building and the end will come. Yeah. Right? So anyway, I had a client. This is probably the most interesting time of my career. A lot of luck and timing. Call me and say, this was in February before COVID. Hey, Adam, I can make masks and put them in orders. The guy was taking like 5 or 6 orders a day. And this is when COVID was in Italy. It wasn't in the United States yet. And I said, you can make masks. Well, and again, I was back on my feet. I was feeling very blessed and fortunate to sort of be in a better place. I said, well, why don't we create a website, which is what I do for a living, and let's sell masks for donation to hospitals. So I found a hospital in New York. I found a hospital in LA, launched a website, put in a LinkedIn post, basically, asking friends and family, buy 2 masks and I'll match it and I'll make a third. And the economics were actually, I was losing money on every order, but I didn't, I really truly wanted to make a difference. 1,000 masks in about 72 hours for donation to these 2 hospitals. And I got an email from Shopify saying, you're not allowed to use the word donation on your website. So, I wouldn't say I was a big player with Shopify with 20 clients, but, I had a contact and I'm emailing them saying, guys, I'm losing money here. I'm trying to really help save lives. Like, what do you mean? And they're like, we're sorry, this is policy. And obviously there was a ton of sensitivity around COVID, what you could say, what you couldn't say. What I made sure we didn't say was these masks solved or helped prevent COVID, which of course they didn't. But it was better than nothing, right? This was like at the start of the PPE shortage. So meanwhile, I have like all my friends and family texting me, I need masks. This is when you literally was before the lockdown. You couldn't get anything. And I kept saying, I'm not doing this for profit. I'm not selling masks. And then when we got shut down, I said to my friend at LA Made, like, how many yards of fabric do you have in the camo? Let's make this a fashionable item. So we made me 1,000 masks, or us 1,000 masks. We were partners. He did all the production. We shared the cost of goods, and I did everything else, the marketing, the fulfillment, the customer service, blah, blah, blah. And we sold 1,000 masks in about 3 hours.
Wow.
And the rest is somewhat history. We were the first and only company for about 4 months to have masks online available, commercial purchase and immediate delivery. We did about $4 million in revenue in about 120 days. I personally made about $1 million. But most importantly, and obviously more than money, was the fact that I really finally got my mojo back and my confidence. And while all of this was happening on a personal front with the masks revenue generation, e-commerce went absolutely crazy, right? Obviously, everything was locked down. So I started to really put my foot on the gas. I hired or I befriended my fractional CFO, who was always interested in the business, made a personal investment to buy 10% of the company, became so much more than a 10% owner, became my partner, became one of my closest business confidants, the best thing that ever happened to me in business. I was sort of the sprinter and he was the smart, methodical one.
And what's his name?
Jonathan Tipton.
Jonathan Tipton. Shout out to Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan, if you're listening, God bless you. Love you, buddy. And Jonathan now serves as the CFO for eHouse Studios for this new venture that we're a part of. Anyhow, we built a real business. And that trajectory led me to hiring and bringing on some real talent, more talent than I ever had at either of my first 2 companies. We acquired an email-focused agency because the all-in-one business model was becoming too difficult to attract new business. Because back in the day, 2008, 2010, 2012, brands, and again, our concentration was fashion, even though we do every category now. But back then, direct to consumer and e-com was like a secondary part of their business. They were a wholesaler first, direct to consumer second or third, right? Manufacturing, distribution, onesies, twosies, no interest, even though it's the highest margin. Now when brands start, the first thing they do is launch a website, and they think about that infrastructure and how it's a part of their whole business. So I started to see a natural slowdown of leads and opportunity. And so I always loved email. I thought email was always, I know email is sort of the king of ROAS and really the best retention tool and most profitable engine for brands and anybody that's looking to do online marketing. Email is king. So we bought an email agency in June of 2022.
And this is Commerce 12. You acquired who?
I acquired a company called Tetra. Tetra Marketing had a very specific email base. They were servicing about 25 clients just for email. And I was probably servicing about 25 clients for this sort of full experience of operational e-commerce management. Put the two companies together and grew it to about 90 overall clients with about a 50-50 spread from email only to full service. But every client across the universe of our ecosystem used email. So 100%.
Yeah, Adam, how did you find Tetra?
That's a great question. So I decided I wanted to buy an email agency. And so because we were running about, 30 whatever brands at the time, I asked one of my lead account managers to go find an email agency to help us with email and set up calls with as many email agencies as she could. And she knew, and I knew, that my goal was to have conversations with these agencies and then approach them about acquiring them. Right. First agency I spoke to got a gentleman on the phone, and I told him, I'm very interested in doing a deal. Would you be interested in doing an acquisition or a strategic partnership? And he said yes. Deal closed 90 days later.
Man, I can't tell you how many guys think, geez, we should do this, and just don't really understand how difficult it is to find the right size, the right time in the potential seller's life, the right deal structure, the opportunity for cross-sell. And it just fell into your lap. First call?
First call. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did any lessons learned from the negotiation and from the integration?
I would say that the biggest lessons learned are, number one, make sure you have an unbelievable CFO. Shout out Jonathan Tipton. And make sure that you have an unbelievable attorney to represent your needs. Regardless,
Who did that for you?
That's my friend Alan Noskow from King and Spalding. So, another dear friend. So I do happen to be fortunate to have a personal circle that's a pretty intelligent group that I align myself with that are much smarter than me. So ultimately, in full transparency, they both led that deal soup to nuts. And they actually ultimately led the acquisition deal for Commerce 12 to be acquired by eHouse as well, soup to nuts.
So take me to that. So now you acquired Tetra when?
I think we closed in May of 22.
Okay. And so now you've got, you're cross-selling, you're growing, you're doing all those kind of things. I assume the guys at eHouse knocked on your door.
So it's an interesting story. So I was not looking to sell. I think the business now is probably doing, let's say, between 5 and 6 million in revenue, probably had about $1 million in EBITDA, maybe a little more, something along those lines. And I was down in Florida in March of 23. And, at this point, Tetra was fully integrated. And I got a call, hey, this is such and such. I'm representing a private equity firm. Are you interested in selling? And I said, look, I'll talk to anybody. Of course, I'll never close a door. But before I sign an NDA or before we even have a conversation, I'm going to tell you right now, we're not doing 10 million in revenue and we're not doing 2 million in EBITDA. So if those are the requirements, which is understood, it's not that I'm not interested, but we're not there. And feel free to reach back out to me in a year or two. We're certainly headed in the right direction, but we're not there yet. No problem, Adam. Thanks for your candor, this, that, whatever. I really didn't think anything of it. A month later, they call back. We're interested in doing a deal still. Are you interested? I said, sure.
And they is Periscope Equity.
That is not. That is a group out of Dallas, Texas, a different private equity firm.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. Yeah. The story gets more curious. Go ahead.
Yes. And so, Jonathan, again, my CFO, who has a tremendous background in private equity, was, I wouldn't use the word adamant against going through the process, but, really was urging me to put a book together to go through a process, because the biggest strength in a deal or something like this is obviously to have people playing against each other and to really see your value over a group, which seems to be what you focus on, Todd. And I wasn't fortunate enough to have met you beforehand, so we didn't have that representation and those opportunities. But I was interested and intrigued. They made an offer that was $6 million in cash and $2 million in stock.
The guys in Dallas.
To me, was a very, very fair offer for where we were in the business. I was willing to go down the path. I didn't realize.
How big was that group? Because you were going to be a tuck into a portfolio.
We were going to be about the third or fourth acquisition. That's a great question. So we certainly weren't the lead, right?
Okay. But 6 and 2 is a great offer off of where your EBITDA was.
A great offer. And I think my problem was, I'm turning 50. I'm certainly not done by any means. Everybody sort of has their own definition of what they need. This was an amazingly fair offer. I couldn't even ask for more from the offer. It just wasn't retirement money, at least from where I sat, right? So I struggled with it. I have this great lifestyle business. We have this amazing, amazing camaraderie, and we just have an amazing company. We Commerce 12, just the vibe and really the people is what made it. And I really invested in really good people, more so than I ever had in any other business as you get older.
And you owned 100% of the business?
So Jonathan owned a piece of the business, and I owned the rest at that time. And then the owner of Tetra owned a piece as well.
Okay.
So basically we went all the way down the road, and I did not feel that this group did the best job in terms of diligence and learning about my team. And they really did a lot of research into me and really felt that I was everything to the business. And I was a lot to the business, but I certainly was not everything to this business. There's no way. And at the end of the day, we met with the group, and I finally got over the hump, like, okay, I'm going to do this. I like these people. I'm ready to do it. I'm all in.
Was there something that occurred or just clicked in your mind?
Well, I met with them, and I was like, all right, you know what? This is real money. Like, this is a great platform for me. Business is not getting easier. I started to see a little bit of challenge. Not in terms of the operations of the business. We were always a great provider. Just in terms of the inbound lead flow was starting to slow. And I think that's a post-COVID correction as well. That took a couple of years to materialize. And like some of the tactics that we were using for lead gen were starting to really not work as well. So the metrics didn't seem great to me, sort of as I forecasted forward. So I was just like, look, there is some consolidation in the industry going on. I see it. And I want to be a part of it. I don't want to be left holding the bag at the end and be a one-man band or a smaller band that, was trying to just struggle along. And my biggest thing with my staff literally was, if you work hard and do what you're supposed to do, you will make more money with me every single year. And that was a promise that I kept to my employees that I was able to do until I started to see some downturn that made me nervous, right? Because from a owner's perspective, I could always make what I wanted to make if I wanted to do it at the detriment of others to the benefit of myself. Oh, let's cut 2 people. I never wanted to do that. I just didn't. That's just not how I live. And if you work hard, you don't deserve that. And so it's my job to make sure we're growing, to make sure that you have a better life for yourself. So anyway, I started to see a slowdown. So I had a breakfast meeting with them. 2 weeks later, they call me out of the blue, and they say, "We're not doing the deal." And I was in complete shock. Didn't understand. Couldn't figure out why. Their excuse was that they thought that there was too much key man risk. For anybody that doesn't understand, it means that I'm too important to the business. And like I said from the beginning of this conversation, as it relates to this deal, I felt that they did not do a good job of learning my people and knowing who we were. So fast.
Can I ask this, Adam? When you met with them face to face, did they meet ever any of your key people?
They met Jonathan and myself,
Okay.
who they loved.
Yeah, but not the next level down.
Nope. Which is
And were you, there's always a concern about, geez, I don't know if we're actually going to do a deal or not. I don't want to involve everybody. How did you think about that?
I was ready to share with my team after that meeting, but they never asked. Again, I run my business like an open book. My team knew our numbers. They knew how we were doing. They knew when things were good. They knew when things were bad. So I was not hiding it. I mean, I was hiding it from them up until the point of like, okay, this is looking like it's going to go. Let's introduce the concept. But it did prepare me for what was to come next, which I think is a good segue. I was really pissed, and I'm a pretty competitive person. So what I did immediately thereafter was I was a little down for about 48 hours. Been through a hell of a lot worse, obviously, as described earlier. And so I had one of my key people pull for me a list of 150 agencies, and I started cold calling like I was 22 years old. And I reached out to probably 40 or 50 agencies about doing a merger and or an acquisition, and then going to private equity to approach them about funding something bigger and doing it myself to compete against not only this private equity roll up, but literally to just say, well, why can't I do this? Right. I have the experience, and we've bought a lot of companies. Jonathan's bought a ton of companies, and screw it. We'll go be the lead. Had some really interesting phone calls, one of which was eHouse, and talked about a potential merger with a premier Shopify partner. We were sort of the post-launch arm, and they were the high-tech partner. And this is the most random occurrence of all. Really hit it off with the owners of eHouse. And they said to me, you know what, Adam, we're talking to somebody else right now. We're going to put this on hold. I said, okay, I understand. And
so was this before they were backed by private equity? And so they were actually talking with Periscope at that time.
So I get a call a week later from my friend Tony Pacetti, who used to be the COO of a company called One Stop that back in my Skye Associates days I used to compete with. They were the top of the market. We were sort of lower boutique brands. So we weren't really competitors. We were sort of only competitors, if that.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, Adam, I'm working on a roll-up, and I have another company that I'm talking to called eHouse. And would you be interested in talking to me? And I said, look, man, I just went through this. My CFO is not going to go through this again. He wants us, if we're ever going to do this again, to go through a process. This is what this firm was offering me, and I was really on the edge. And you're my friend. I'm just going to tell you, I'm just not going through this again. And he said to me, I'm going to make the offer better than what you had. And you have my word as my friend and my colleague for 20 years that this is going to happen. And as long as everything you're saying is true and your numbers check out, we're going to do a deal.
It's so interesting, Adam, because certainty to close with somebody is a foreign concept until a deal falls apart.
Yep.
We bring it up with clients all the time, and it doesn't seem to register for people that have never had something fall apart. But it is that relationship and that trust that either gets developed during the diligence process, or you were fortunate enough to have a long-term relationship, is critical oftentimes to getting a deal over the finish line.
And even in agreed. And even in those scenarios, there's no guarantees with any of this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's hard, right?
And I will say that because our financial reporting and the elements of the finances of our business were so clean and so firm and so legit, it made the diligence process for any potential buyer much easier. Everything.
You have a full data room, right?
Everything. I mean, they need to be updated, and they immediately saw the value in what Jonathan brought to the table, which is why they made them CFO of this new venture.
Yeah.
And it was also really intriguing that we would be company 1A and 1B. We were the start of the platform, right?
So you actually get, although you're smaller than he is, you get, or eHouse is, you get all the same economic lift in what your roll forward was as the platform company does.
And what's interesting is we weren't smaller than eHouse. That's the most interesting part, right? Okay. I would say that we're very comparable, but eHouse has a better name in the Shopify ecosystem, which is a little more valuable than a huge name in like the Klaviyo email system, right? Yeah. Shopify is what starts it all. Klaviyo is what sort of feeds it. So, when they basically said, we're going to merge your name and we're going to merge everything under eHouse, again, this is my third rodeo. Name to me didn't matter. It was more conceptual. What mattered to me was what my compensation was. And I think of more importance, what the compensation was to my key staff, in which I basically had them participate in the deal for upside down the road, and brought them to the forefront of this deal day one. To say to these guys at Periscope Equity, who funded the eHouse and Commerce 12 acquisitions, who was literally the best group of people I've ever worked with. I mean, and I don't say that lightly. They didn't retrade. They didn't change the deal. They never did one thing that was underhanded or disrespectful whatsoever.
So let me shout out there for a second. John Finley is the guy that you worked with at
correct.
Periscope. Periscope has made a good name for themselves because they funded a company called Power Digital, which they built and then resold or sold to a group in Manhattan called Court Square. You can, for listeners, if you want to search the podcast, you can listen to Grayson LaFrenz, who's the founder of Power, talk about his experience at Periscope Equity, which I think you would hear him reflect the very same things. You can also, we're actually just finished a series called PE Insights. And John is one of the 8 private equity guys that are on there and talks about the way that they view the world. And you listen to certain private equity guys and it makes sense. They're smart. They have money. They operate in a certain way and they align with people like you. It makes sense to me that they're always going to win when they put those pieces together and conduct themselves in that way. So I'm not surprised to hear those accolades to Periscope and to John.
Yeah, they've been amazing. So anyway, we consummated the deal, and ultimately, I'm the head of business development now at eHouse Studio. It's a really great group of people, and my team that I brought over is, I explained to them how important they were. eHouse knew right away how important they were to running the business, or Periscope, I should say. And they understand that this is a path for them from a career perspective. I have a very young staff, right? That this is going to ultimately potentially lead to more than what I could give them, not only for career growth, but also in the event of a potential second bite, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. So let's do biggest takeaway from the process. From a listener, I would say biggest takeaway is Adam stays in the fight, right? And I've been through it a couple of times. Deals fall apart for various reasons. Emotionally, it's difficult and it's hard. And you, like anything as an entrepreneur, you get back up and you stay in the fight and you get after it. I'm so thrilled it led you to where it did in divine providence. What's your biggest takeaway from those experiences that you would share?
I would say a couple things, like, and anybody that is an entrepreneur that's done this before knows, like, it's a never ending battle and you just need to just stay in the ring. No matter what, you got to stay in the ring. And secondarily is, and most importantly, is surrounding yourself with talent is the most important thing you can ever do. And it's the 2 biggest mistakes that I ever made with my first business. And you learn as you get older. First business, I was lucky to be successful and walk away with a decent exit. The second business was rough, and the third business was really good. And still to this day, as I continue on with eHouse, there's an opportunity for even more. And I'm surrounding myself with people that maybe I didn't select, but they selected me.
Right. So, that's a great point. And I will tell you, if Periscope can replicate some of their past successes, you will be in great hands. And hopefully, as you progress, we'll have you back on in a year or so, and you can update us on your success, because I'm sure it'll be strong. But sharing everything that you have along the way, Adam, has been great. So thanks for being such a wonderful guest. Continued success. And thanks to our sponsors at Fiscal Advocate. And terrific episode, Adam. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.